A new development occurred in the 1920s with the development of the organic view of nature. The philosopher who most persuasively advanced this view was Alfred North Whitehead. I shall talk more about him in subsequent episodes. And he put forward the idea that nature is actually much more like an organism than a machine. The universe is more like an organism than a machine. Living organisms are more like organisms than machines. That should be fairly obvious. And that even atoms and molecules were more like organisms than machines. Quantum theory revealed that atoms were not made up of little billiard ball-like particles of matter, but rather vibrating patterns of energetic activity. The fields of the atoms, the quantum fields, gave them form, and the energy gave them activity. And they're all vibrating waves of activity, vibrating structures of activity. Matter was not stuff that just endured through time, but a process. And so even in the chemical realm, the atoms and molecules and crystals could be seen as sort of miniature organisms. And he pointed out that nature is organized in a series of levels. This idea was taken much further by the philosopher and writer Arthur Koestler. And there's a picture he drew showing this pattern in which nature is organized. And what it shows is that nature is organized in a series of levels. The smallest circles in this diagram could be subatomic particles, and the next level could be atoms, the next level molecules, the next level crystals. Or they could be organelles in cells, in tissues, in organs, in organisms, in societies of organisms like flocks of birds, in ecosystems, in planets, in solar systems, in galaxies, and so on. That everywhere you look in nature, there are levels of organization where the whole is more than the sum of the parts. You can't understand the whole by looking at the parts in isolation. You can't understand the properties of water by studying the properties of hydrogen and oxygen by themselves. You can't understand the properties of a chimpanzee by studying chimpanzee fibroblasts and muscle cells in tissue culture. You can't understand a solar system by just considering a planet, the whole thing, or a galaxy just by considering a star. The galaxy has a pattern of organization which is not just present in individual solar systems. So this holarchical or nested hierarchical way of organizing nature is present at every level. And at every level, the whole is like an organism that contains parts that are like organs within the organism. This is a very different way of looking at nature from the reductive mechanistic way of thinking, which tries to explain all of nature in terms of parts, and it tries to reduce everything to the smallest mechanical parts. In biology, the smallest parts are molecules, so under mechanistic materialism, the most prestigious and important area of biology is molecular biology, because that's where you can reduce life to the smallest bits, molecules. But when you do that, of course, a lot of the interest of biology just disappears. The beauty of the rose, the smell of the rose, the homing behavior of a pigeon, the migratory patterns of a cuckoo, all these disappear in a kind of biology where what you do is kill organisms, grind them up, and then isolate their molecules in test tubes and study genes and proteins and other molecules in isolation. Then if you try and put these back together in mathematical models, as in systems biology, if you try and build up from the bottom, you get what's called a combinatorial explosion. The number of possible combinations becomes more and more and more until it's intractable. Instead, the holistic view, or the organismic view, shows nature is organized in a top-down method as well as a bottom-up method. At each level, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. Our organs, the liver, the kidney, the spleen, etc., depend on the whole organism for their well-being. And our whole organisms depend on the fact we're part of larger social organisms, families, societies, cultures. None of us could survive for very long on our own. We all depend on the ecosystem of the Earth, and that depends on the sun and the planets and the whole solar system and the galaxy. At every level, there's a wholeness that's more than the sum of the parts. And then in our new cosmology, since 1966, we've had the Big Bang cosmology, where the universe begins very, very small, less than the size of a head of a pin, billions of degrees centigrade. And since then it's been expanding and cooling down, and more forms and structures have appeared within it ever since. The universe itself is now much more like an organism. This is nothing like a mechanical clock. Mechanical clocks don't start small and grow and form new structures within them as they grow, but growing plants do and growing embryos do. It's like a giant growing organism, the whole universe. And the planets, solar systems are like organisms. And so if we ask the question with which I started, is nature mechanical? Is everything machine-like? The answer is no. Everything's much more organism-like. And when you think about it, the machine metaphor is only a metaphor. It's not a proven fact. You can't do an experiment to prove that a dog is a machine. You can't even prove that the dog's heart is nothing but a pump. The heart changes its activity. It has all sorts of other functions besides pumping blood. And the brain's not just a computer. These attempts to reduce organisms to mechanical metaphors are at best limited. The metaphors can help in certain ways. The eye is a bit like a camera, the heart is a bit like a pump, but they're not the ultimate explanation or the whole truth. At the end of each of the chapters of my book, The Science Delusion, I have a series of questions for materialists. And I'll finish by mentioning these questions. The reason I put forward these questions is so that you can take this further by discussing it with your friends. If you have friends or family members who are materialists, who believe in the religion of science, or who simply taken it for granted without questioning it or thinking about it because that's what they've been taught, and most people, reasonably enough, believe what they've been taught by authoritative figures in schools and universities. There are questions you can ask which are real questions. The first one, is the mechanistic worldview a testable scientific theory or a metaphor? Well, I've argued it's a metaphor. You couldn't actually test that a galaxy is a machine, or purely mechanistic, or purely mindless, or without any other organizing principles. And most mechanistic believers just aren't aware that it's nothing but a metaphor. Metaphors can be useful, but they're not right or wrong. They can have their uses, but they always have their limitations. The second question is, if it is a metaphor, why is the machine metaphor better in every respect than the organism metaphor? If it is a scientific theory, how could it be tested or refuted? So this takes further this questioning of the machine theory as a metaphor. And then the third question, do you think that you yourself are nothing but a complex machine? If someone's a consistent mechanistic materialist, they should believe that they themselves are nothing but a machine, and also that their thoughts are nothing but mechanical processes going on in their brains, that they have no free will. Yet most people who are mechanistic materialists are actually rather inconsistent when you push them. It turns out they think the rest of the universe is mechanical, but they're an exception to the rest, and so are their friends and family, and possibly all other humans, possibly even dogs if they like dogs, and maybe other animals too, horses, cats, parrots. But they ought to believe that they're nothing but a complex machine. And if they don't, they're already doubting the theory they claim to believe in. And the final question is, have you been programmed to believe in materialism? Because if you believe you're nothing but a machine, then your belief in materialism isn't something that can be true or false if you have no ability to choose it freely among alternatives, but instead you only believe it because your brain makes you do so. So a consistent materialist would have to believe that they themselves have been programmed by their education and upbringing to believe in materialism. And there's nothing in that proves materialism's true. It just proves they've been programmed to believe it. And again, most materialists don't really want to agree with that question. They want to make an exception for themselves. But I think these questions reveal that this materialist worldview is literally incredible. Even though people pretend to believe it or pretend to go along with it, they can only do so if they make an exception for themselves and indeed for their belief system. So, in answer to the first question, is nature mechanical? The answer is, well, this is just a metaphor, and there are better metaphors for many aspects of nature. Nature is more like a machine. Organisms are more like living organisms than machines. And there's nothing that compels us to believe in this worldview, except for the force of historical habit. And this was adopted in the first place as a rejection of a worldview of the world as alive and there being mind in nature. But this old view, animism or panpsychism, is now coming back in full force, as I will discuss in the next episode.
Find out more on advire.life.